Hey, it's Tia. Today I want to talk to you about the books that I read during the month of September. During the month of September, I read 14 books, and today I'm going to share them with you in the order that I read them. The first book that I finished during the month of September was The Secret Garden by Hodgson Burnett. This is a book that I buddy read with my oldest daughter. We sort of just swapped the book back and forth and kept on track with each other so that we could discuss the book as we went along. This is a children's classic, and it follows a young girl named Mary who's living in India with her parents when a cholera outbreak happens and her parents are killed from the disease, and she ends up having to move back to England to live with her uncle whom she has never met. So the rest of the book is basically her time there living in Misselthwaite with her uncle and her cousin and this amazing garden that she finds while she's living there. This is just a magical, heartwarming story that I have read many times and I always love. I seem to forget how magical and wonderful it is in between times, but then when I reread it, I'm like in love all over again. It's just a beautiful story about childhood and growth and friendship and love and family, and I definitely recommend this one if you have not read it already. And I completed House of Dreams: The Life of L.M. Montgomery by Liz Rosenberg. So this is a biography about the life of L.M. Montgomery, the author of the Anne of Green Gables stories, as well as many other books. And I decided to go ahead and read this in September because, as I'm sure you know, from January to August I was reading the Anne of Green Gables series, and so while it was fresh on my mind, I wanted to go ahead and read a biography about this author. And this was really well written and well researched, I believe. It was very easy to read and very easy to digest and just to understand everything that the author was talking about. I do think that it's shown a big light on the Anne of Green Gables series as far as the way that the author wrote those books and some things that happened in those books that were a little bit questionable as I was reading them. Getting a glimpse inside her life and the things that she struggled with and the things that she went through really helped me to put her writings in perspective, if that makes sense at all. I had heard before that L.M. Montgomery was sort of a sad woman who dealt with depression and that her life wasn't exactly what you might expect it to be, and I would say that is definitely the case. I think that if you have read the Anne series, that I would definitely recommend this book. I feel like it was almost like necessary in a way to sort of get my head around the life of Ellen Montgomery and how much it affected her writing of the Anne series. So yeah, if you are a fan of Ellen Montgomery, I would recommend this. I will say, if you're a huge fan and you are like absolutely in love with her works, this might make you a little bit sad and upset with her because she does do some questionable things throughout her life. But if you were like me and some of the Anne books, you were wondering like, why are their tones so different and why is there such a big up and down in some of the books, then I think that this will help you put those answers into perspective. So yeah. Then the next three books were books that I read for the BookTube Prize. So this was the final round of the BookTube Prize, and these are the three final books that I had to read for it. The first one was Lanny by Max Porter. This follows a young boy named Lanny who lives in a small English village, and the book is told through the perspective of his mother, his father, and this other character named Dead Papa Toothwort, who's really hard to explain. He's basically like this legend that children have talked about in this village for years, and I guess he's also sort of like, really, he's a spirit who wanders around and listens in on the thoughts of everyone who lives in the village. This was probably one of the strangest books that I've ever read, and I honestly didn't find any enjoyment in it whatsoever. I know other people love it. It obviously made it really far in the BookTube Prize, so there's something there that other people enjoy. For me, I didn't like it. I didn't find it to be a successful story. I remember being angry when I was reading it because I ended up having to get the physical book and the audio book in order to actually understand what was going on, because it was divided into two sections, and in one section it would tell you who was speaking Like it would label, okay, this is from the mom's perspective, now we're at the dad's perspective. And then in the second half, it stopped doing that. It didn't tell you who was speaking anymore. It just kept flashing between people, and sometimes like just random people from the village. So you had no idea who was talking at any point. And the only way I was able to work out who was speaking was to get the audiobook, listen to the first part, see that this is who is speaking, because in the audiobook they didn't tell you who is speaking. You just had to read it in the actual book, like this is the mom who is speaking now. You get used to the mom's voice, and then in the second half, whenever they stop listing who's speaking, I knew from listening to the first half and it being labeled in the actual book, not on the audiobook, that it was the mom speaking, and I'd gotten used to her voice. So then I knew who, when it was switching back and forth, who was talking. That's the only way that you can figure out who is speaking, is to do both at the same time. And to me, that is not a successful book. If I can't read your book in physical format and understand what's going on without having to get the audiobook, then it's not successful. If I can't only listen to the audiobook and understand what's going on, it's not successful. No one should have to do both at the same time in order to understand what the heck you're talking about and who is speaking. I didn't like this book. Yeah. Sorry if you liked it. I'm sure that there must be something there that I'm missing, but it wasn't successful for me. Then I read Women Talking by Miriam Towles, and this is a book about a Mennonite society in which the women are drugged and then raped over a long period of time. It happens to many of the women in this society. And this is actually based on a true story, which to me was the most interesting part of this book. The fact that this led me to actually research this in real life incident and find out more about it was the only redeeming quality of this book. So this is just following, I think, 8 different Mennonite women as they get together and they discuss what they are going to do after all these things have happened. Are they going to stay and deal with it? Are they going to fight against the men and, try to win their rights and do, get revenge on them or whatever? Or are they just going to walk away, leave, and start over? And you hear the story from a man who is there taking the minutes of the meeting. So, well, it was interesting story, horrific thing that happened to these women. I was glad to have learned about this thing that happened in real life, but the way the story was told was incredibly boring. I don't know how it's possible to make this horrific thing into such a boring story, but this author did it. And then the fact that she chose a man to tell the story just really irked me. Like, these horrible things happen to these women. They are the ones who are having to decide their future, the fate of themselves and their children after this terrible thing has happened over a course of 2 years to them. And the author chooses for a man to take down the story and tell it to us. Okay. I didn't like this one either. Then, moving on. The last book that I read for the BookTube Prize was 10 Minutes, 38 Seconds in This Strange World by Elif Shafak. So this is about a woman who is a prostitute in Istanbul. She has been killed, and these 10 minutes and 38 seconds are the time that her brain is still active after her body has been killed. She is laying there thinking about everything that has happened in her life and recalling, all of her past. So I thought that this book was really interesting, and I really enjoyed this concept of the 10 minutes and 38 seconds. I enjoyed looking back on Layla's life and the things that happened to her. Terrible, horrible things happened to her. They're not easy to read about, but I thought that the book was well written and the story was intriguing enough to keep me reading. Now, about 3/4 of the way through, the storyline shifted into a place that wasn't quite as interesting. I don't want to spoil it for you. I think it would have been better if we had just stuck with Layla, but it shifted into something else which I didn't enjoy as much. So this book was okay. It was passable. It was interesting enough to read. It didn't make me hate it. So that's something good. Next I read Song for a Whale by Lynn Kelly. This is a middle grade book that I again sort of buddy read with my older daughter. This follows a 12-year-old deaf girl who is a tech genius, and she is learning how to fit in at school, or maybe not how to fit in at school. She wants to be friends with people who are like her, and she wants people to understand her. And she ends up learning about this whale called Blue 55, and she feels a strong connection to this whale, and she wants to make a song for this whale. I absolutely loved this book. I loved the main character, and I loved her connections with her grandmother and her grandfather that you get to see in the book. I love her strength of character and how much she wants to do all of this for Blue 55, and it was just a great story. I highly recommend this. I think that you will love it. You will fall in love with all of the characters and the story, and yeah, I think that it's a perfect book for kids maybe 8 or 9 and up, and I can't recommend it enough. Then I read Hyperbole and a Half by Ali Broche. And this is a comic graphic novel type non-fiction book. I don't really know how to explain this. It's basically Allie telling her story or little bits and pieces of her life through these very rough sketches. And I always had heard that this is like a really funny memoir type book, and the beginning was hilarious. She talks a lot about her childhood in a way that I thought was hilarious and relatable, and I laughed my way through the beginning part. I made my husband read some of it. It was just a lot of fun, and at the point in the month that I read this, I really was needing something funny, and that's why I decided to go ahead and read this. But then about halfway through, it switches into talking about her dealings with depression, and it was like so depressing, and so it just like hit me. I mean, it was like relatable, and I don't know, it just sunk me because I wasn't expecting it. Like, I totally understand that that's her journey, and I relate to it. I think that's why it hit me so hard, but I just felt like it came out of nowhere. Like, we were laughing, and then all of a sudden it was just like this abysmal, absolute, utter depression. I can't even explain the way that she talks about depression. I don't know. So yeah, if you are looking for something that is funny, definitely read this, but just go in knowing that the middle part is about depression, and it could be triggering for you if you are dealing with depression, or if you have dealt with depression in the past. I think that you have to be in a really good spot in order to not let this middle part of the book affect you. Okay, then I read Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. This was the group read for the Fall Into Reading Challenge, and we read this over on Instagram. We had a great time reading this book. At least I did. I think everyone else did as well. But this book was just, it was fabulous. I love this book so much. I love the way it was written. I will be definitely reading more of Octavia Butler's books as soon as I get a chance to. But this follows Dana, who is pulled back into the past, into the antebellum South, and she visits her relatives there, and you just learn more and more about Dana and about her relatives, and you get to see this juxtaposition of this modern woman having to figure out a way to survive during slavery in the South. And it was just, it was heart-wrenching, and it was page-turning, and it was just, it was so good. It lended itself to so much discussion in our discussion group, and it's one that I will never forget, and I definitely will be rereading. Definitely recommend checking this out if you haven't already. I can't say enough good things about it. Then I read The Eighth Detective by Alex Pavesi, I think is how you say that last name. So this is a book that I had through NetGalley. So thank you to NetGalley for the e-arc of this book. This is a mystery book that's really hard to describe. So basically at the beginning, you're following this woman who is like an editor, or she works for a publishing company. She's basically interviewing this author who long ago had written this compilation of short stories of mysteries, and her publisher, the publisher that she works for, wants to republish this book, kind of like repackage it and put it back out there. This author, he has like this theory about the mystery genre and what it takes to make a mystery. It's like this mathematical equation, and each one of his stories sort of represent parts of that equation. And so she is interviewing him or talking to him. They're reading each one of the stories together and then talking through the equation and how each part of it works within each one of those detective novels. So you get to read their conversation, then you read one of the stories, then you read one of their conversations, then you read another one of the mystery stories, so on. And there is an overarching mystery sort of that ties them all together in the end, and it was really intriguing to me. I enjoyed all of the mysteries, and I definitely enjoyed the framing device that tied everything together and just made this a really interesting book to me. It was unlike anything that I've read before, and I really enjoyed it for that creativity that the author put into it, and I definitely will be looking into more from this author in the future. And next was Buzzwordathon, and for that I managed to read 3 different books. I know I had plans to read like 5, but didn't happen. So the first one I read was Midnight at the Electric by Jodi Lynn Anderson, and this is another book that's a little bit hard to describe, but this follows 3 different women, and the first woman is living in 2065. In this future, the oceans are basically like encroaching on the land and gradually taking everything over, and so yeah, there's just a lot of problems with the earth, so they are starting to send people off to live in Mars. And she has to go off to this training program, and while she's at this training program, she has to live with like a long lost relative that she's never met before. And while she's there at this house, she uncovers like a lot of letters and stuff from her past, from some other women in her past. And through those letters, you get to follow 2 other perspectives. One of them is in Oklahoma, 1934, and the other one is in England, 1919. And I loved this book so much. I loved every aspect of it. Every person that we followed along with, I enjoyed reading about. I loved the way it gradually unfolded to show how they all of the stories work together. I loved, the futuristic next to the parts in the past. It just really worked for me. My only complaint about this is that I do think that the title is misleading. Midnight at the Electric plays a very small part in the book, and so I feel like, you go into it thinking, the cover makes it seem like there's going to be like this carnival, at midnight, and that it's going to be in all 3 of the stories that you're reading about, and it just wasn't. So yeah, I think that this book suffers a little bit from like a bad title and a bad cover, but if you just don't expect anything out of those 2 things, it's a really great story, and I really enjoyed it a lot. Okay, and then I read Midnight by You by Nora Roberts. This is a book that I've had for, I don't know, a while, whenever I was on this kick where I wanted to buy a bunch of books that were set in New Orleans. Rainey and Angie had decided to read this as part of their book club that they do every month. And so I was like, this is the perfect time. I can read it for Buzzwordathon, and they're going to read it. And so I went ahead and picked it up. So the premise of this book is really interesting. The beginning of the book is set in New Orleans in 1899, and it follows, well, the first chapter is crazy, okay? Crazy. It just goes off with a bang, and I sort of want to tell you what happens because it's the first chapter. So I'm just going to tell you. In the very first chapter, this woman is raped and murdered. Okay? That's how the book starts off. So just be forewarned. But then you flash forward to the present day, and this man who's come from Boston and he wants to buy this house. He moves in and starts to fix it up, and he finds that things are not quite what they seem or what he expected in the house. And so you flash back and forth throughout the entire book between the present day of him fixing out the house and finding out more and more about it, and you get to see things that were happening in the past. And so that sounds really interesting, doesn't it? But this book was, I don't know exactly what it was that made this book not wonderful. I gave this 3 stars, so I mean, it was okay. It was interesting. It was just bonkers. This book was just bonkers. That's the only thing I can say about it. I was able to count this for my paranormal space in my Fall Into Reading challenge, if that tells you anything. So that was good. And there was a romance in here that was a little bit like a little bonkers, but I don't know. If you're looking for a paranormal romance that is just completely out there and a little bit crazy and over the top, you should check this out. I mean, I like it for its like kitschiness, you know, like it's nothing that I would recommend probably to anybody. But if you're looking for like a bonkers paranormal romance, this is for you. And if you want to read something set in New Orleans, that'll check that box off too. I will say though, the main character, she called the guy like Cher way too much in here, Chere, and it just sort of drove me crazy. Like that's what she called everybody over and over and over, and I personally wouldn't want to be called that over and over, so it sort of bugged me that she used it as like her term of endearment. I don't like it when people call me sweetheart, you know, like older women or whatever, or I don't even really like it when people call me girl, you know. I don't know. I'm just not one of those like slang terms of endearment type person, so the overuse in here bugged me a little. Anyway, it was fun for what it was. I probably won't be rereading it, but I might keep it around just for like nostalgic kicks purposes. Okay, and then the last book I read for the Buzzwordathon was The Night Gardener by Jonathan Auxier, and this is a middle grade book that is kind of a creepy middle grade book, like a gothic-y, creepy, ghosty type book. And I would say that this would scare the pants off of any one of my children. So yeah, it actually scared me. I ended up having nightmares about this book. This follows 2 orphans who are come from Ireland to find work. They move into this big manor house as servants there, and they quickly discover that things are not what they seem there. There's a lot of really weird stuff going on there, and it was really creepy and scary. This is one of those books where I feel like it's written on a middle grade level, but could a middle grader handle this? I'm not sure. Maybe 13, maybe 12. I mean, it depends on what your middle grader is already used to reading. If they're already used to reading scary stuff, then okay, they could probably handle this. If they're not and they get scared easily, then you might want to preview this beforehand. I don't think I'm going to pass this on to my kids. Even though I really enjoyed it, I thought the writing was beautiful. I loved the characters. I really enjoy Jonathan Auxier, and I'm definitely going to be reading more from him. The atmosphere was great. It was a great book. It just seems so scary for middle graders, but maybe I'm just a scaredy cat. I don't know. I would definitely recommend checking this one out if you have read other stuff by Jonathan Auxier and you enjoy his writing. I think that you would enjoy this one too, and it was fun. And like I said, I gave this 4 stars. It's definitely worth the read. It just, you know, it scared me a little. Then I finished The Wizard of Oz by L. Frank Baum. This is a book that I read out loud with my 3 kids. I had previously read it out loud to the older 2 at different points in time, but now that my youngest was old enough to read it with us, we read it again. And this is a old illustrated version that I've had since I was a kid. My mother actually read this out loud to me when I was, you know, a small child. And so it's just a lot of fun to read it with them every so often. Now I've read it to all three of them, and they all three loved it. They generally forget what happens in between times in the book. They've seen a ton of like cartoon versions, like the Mickey version, and there's like a Phineas and Ferb version, I think. So they know the basic story. They haven't seen the movie yet. We are going to watch that soon, but the actual story is quite a bit different from some of the remakes that you see on television, and different from the movie too. Like Dorothy does not have red shoes, so that was one of the funny things. We were reading it, and my oldest was like, "But wait, they're supposed to be red," and I was like, "But no, they're not. This is the original book. They're not really red. I don't know why they decided to make them red in the movie. I mean, I know that's what they are in everything now, but her shoes were not really red in the book." But anyway, it's just a beautiful story. It's a lot of fun. The kids enjoy it. It's magical, and it's a great memory that I have to share with them, and that I had shared with my mom. And so I'm so thankful to have this copy and to be able to read it with them. Then the very last book that I read during September was The Great Train Robbery by Michael Crichton. So this is a book that follows an actual train robbery that took place during the 1800s in London. So I went into this thinking that this was like a thrill ride mystery. I had heard somewhere from someone that it was fast-paced thrill ride, you know, page turner, which is not what this was. This is not what I would call a thriller. So I feel like that sort of affected my reading of this at first, and I had to gradually adjust my expectations in order to get more enjoyment out of this. But because this follows an actual thing, an actual occurrence, something that actually happened, you know from the very beginning who the robbers are, who planned it, and you know that they got caught, because at the very beginning, I mean, that's how he's telling the stories, from their testimonies in court. So that does not make it very thrilling. I mean, the fact that you already know everything, like from the beginning, you know what's going to happen. To me, that's not a definition of a thriller, but it was suspenseful though. Like, you gradually get to figure out how all of the working parts of the heist came together, which I thought was really intriguing, and what is the standout part of this book for me. You learn a ton about Victorian London and the history of London and trains and different robberies, and lots of terminologies that crooks and stuff used during this time period. They have all these different people that they use, as, you know, this guy's good with keys, and this guy is a lookout, and this guy does this, and they have women who do certain things for them. It really felt like Ocean's 11, and the fact that there were so many different moving pieces. There were so many different people who had a hand in the robbery, and everything had to go just right. It was such a big undertaking that it really, really reminded me of that movie. Now, I don't think that movie was based on this, but it definitely gave me those types of vibes. I will say that a lot of times this read like a nonfiction book, and I really question if it is a fiction book, because you know, so much of it was taken from court cases, and then there were so many pieces of history thrown in here that I wonder which parts were actually fiction. I'm not really sure about that, because it really read like a nonfiction book. And so I would recommend this book for sure, but definitely go into it knowing that it's not a fast-paced thriller, that you are going to know who the people, the robbers, are from the beginning. You're going to know who done it from the beginning. You're going to know the outcome. You're just going into it to hear about all of the bits and pieces and how they got all of this to work together in order to pull this humongous train robbery off. It's really very intriguing and very interesting to learn all of that history behind this. I'm definitely glad that I read this, and this is the third Michael Crichton book that I've read now, and I think that this is probably tied with the Andromeda strain for me on a level of enjoyment. So if you're thinking about trying him out, you are not sure where to start other than Jurassic Park, I would recommend this one, The Great Train Robbery, and the Andromeda strain I would skip The Terminal Man. That's just my personal opinion though. I didn't really enjoy that one. So those are all the books that I read during the month of September. I definitely had some winners and I definitely had some books that I didn't enjoy at all. Let me know down in the comments if you read any of these books and what your thoughts were about them. Tell me what your favorite thing was that you read during the month of September. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.